Boom! We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be, and of course, however you may be listening. I am going to be continuing in my yearly series that I have done for the past 2 to 3 seasons, which is the positional breakdowns. Now, full disclosure right off the bat, I do want to tell you guys, just due to circumstance changes and changes in my profession and career, I do think it's going to be hard for me to do a preview for every position group. If I am able to, on top of some of the other videos that I definitely want and have to make, such as the season prediction and overview and, what Iowa needs to do statistically to have a good season, that video. Not that I want to give my video ideas away, but if I'm going to be able to do it, there might be some videos where I have to double up and do, like linebackers, D line, safeties, corner, full DB group, which, that wouldn't be the end of the world, but preferably it would just be each individual position group. That's what I do. That's it. And, we go from there. So anyways, I digress. Today, oh, and by the way, guys, if I mess up anybody's last name, get over it. If you want to be that guy that makes the a comment in the comment section that goes, actually, this is how you say the last name, be my guest. But just don't be surprised if I comment back and go tit for tat with you, uh, about that. I don't care. If me going back and forth with you means that you're not going to watch my channel for a while, so be it. I said in the shorts that I did, I don't really care. If this was a few years ago, maybe I would have cared a little bit more. But now, again, ultimately, this is a hobby for me. I just want to enjoy discussing Iowa sports with you guys. Yes, some of the added stuff like, that comes with it. Is that a decent perk? Yes, but it's certainly not enough to like placate and stuff like that. Again, I am an Iowa Hawkeye fanatic and have been for a long time. That is the perspective that I'm coming from. And as far as I'm aware, there's not really very many Iowa channels that are, as popular as mine that do that. Most of the popular Hawkeye channels are basically like associated with some mainstream company. And so if that's what you want, kind of just like the toe the line, run of the mill milk toast, my name is Scott Doctorman, and today we're going to be talking about Iowa Hawkeye sports. And if that's what you want, fine. Like more power. But still, again, I'm going to equally come at you in the comment section. So just know that. And for what it's worth, I recently listened to a recording that Sean Bach and Hawkeye Insider did with their new member Elliot Clough, who was formerly with Rivals, which I do want to touch upon that ever so slightly as well. And so essentially Hawk Insider, and they were mainly talking about Iowa basketball and specifically Alvaro Figueres, uh, Figueres, and you know, even Elliot messed up one of the last names. I'm trying to remember which last name it was specifically that he said like people he's heard people pronounce it this way. He's heard people pronounce it that way. That's right. It's Trevin Urich, and people have gone back and forth between Jurek, Urich, and things like that. So this is not a perfect science where, every name is going to be 100% correct 100% of the time. And if that's the biggest takeaway that you have in a video, I don't know. To me, I think you have problems because like there's so much other stuff that you could comment on and just be good faith rather than somebody's last name. Like, give me a break. So, anyways, today, with that said, oh, one more thing. Uh, I've talked to you guys about the recruiting services, and I've told you guys that I think On3 is the best recruiting service. If you're not aware, the same guy that started Rivals and 247 Sports and sold those recruiting websites and essentially traffic driven sites started On3. It's the same guy. I only know this because he did a interview a while back with Clay Travis, a series that Clay Travis did like one-on-one interviews. He also did an interview with a lot of SEC guys. He did an interview with the guy that was the coach for Texas Tech in their glory years, like 2009. With when they had the really good wide receiver and decent quarterback. And then he went to, I believe, Washington State. Mike, it's Mike Leach. Mike Leach. And so, anyways, um, Rivals was bought again by On3, the guy that started all of these websites and sold them. And I believe that they did it in order to keep the name recognition that Rivals has, rivals.com. And because if you really think about it, on as far as the recruiting landscape goes, yes, 247 Sports has been on an upward trajectory and has kind of been the up and coming recruiting service, especially with younger people. I'd say it's probably the more used and recognized. But as a whole, definitely if this was like 5 to 7 years ago, I would say but even now Rivals is right up there with they might even be more recognizable just like broadly speaking. Now, whether people have a positive or negative opinion on it is a different matter entirely. Just purely name recognition, Rivals is really well known. Whereas On3, which by the way, I like the name On3. I get it. Like On3, ready, break. I like it, but it takes time to generate name recognition, and if you can um, buy something that already has that, it takes a lot of sweat equity out of the process. And you can put that time, energy, and resources into other things. So, anyways, um, just as a side note about Rivals and On3, I don't know if they're going to end up continuing calling their website and Rivals and just get rid of the name of On3 because right now they're kind of doing like what X did, which is simultaneously call themselves Twitter and X at the same time. So we'll see what happens with that. But either way, I think that they're the best recruiting service. So, anyways, today we're going to be discussing and previewing the Iowa quarterbacks room. Normally, I would wait a little bit because this is probably the position group that is the most highly anticipated and obviously the most recognizable. I think that's the case for pretty much every football team. But for Iowa, it's been a position of intrigue for a variety of reasons. But I would normally wait, but I'm not going to do that this time just because I don't know based on time constraints what videos I will be able to make or will not be able to make here moving forward. So, by the way, guys, be sure before we continue, be sure to smash a like button, help the video out. It really helps in the video algorithm. Comment, dislike the video if you want. It helps the algorithm as well. Subscribe. Let's get this channel to 2,000 subscribers. And without further ado, let's dive in to this. So let's start here with the quarterback room. I want to give an overview of where the group was at. And I think I want to go all the way back to Brian Ferentz and kind of how we have gotten here, where we are at literally today, of me, me recording this 7/20/2025. So the quarterback room at the tail end of Brian Ferentz was a room that was, it wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, that they didn't have talent, but it was a quarterback room devoid of like strategy and a purposeful um, putting together of the unit. I think Iowa. I'm still to this day. I think there's a good chance that Brian Ferentz had very little understanding of what he was actually looking for and what type of quarterback he was actually looking for at Iowa. But towards the end, he did start to recruit more athletic quarterbacks. James Razor was one, who eventually transferred, which, we'll get to him momentarily. Even Kade McNamera was slightly more mobile than a Spencer Petras. And that's, also part of the storyline is Spencer Petras. So many apathetic Iowa fans were really tired of the statuesque quarterback that was back there. And I always said, like, I don't have an issue with a quarterback that is more of a pocket passer. My thing is, if that's the quarterback that you're going to be, number one, it needs to be the right offense and scheme. But number two, you need to be a guy that is at the very least above average at passing the football. Because if you're a guy that can't run, but you're also average to maybe even at times below average at passing the football, like, what added element and advantage are you really giving the unit? So that was Iowa's room. They had guys like Joey Labus that they recruited, who ended up transferring. He's transferring again. I think he transferred to Western Midge. I definitely liked him. Brendan Sullivan came in towards the tail end, and some of the names that we're familiar with today. Um, Now, fast forward, Tim Lester gets to Iowa, and pretty much immediately, I would say he starts to revamp and attempt to retool this Iowa Hawkeye football roster. And what we were left with was, let me go ahead and share my screen here, was a few individuals. Okay. I'm talking about last year. Um, Last year, you had Brendan Sullivan. Um, Again, you had Joey Labus, who ended up transferring, I think, before the season even started, actually, because he played in the Kentucky game, and then um, for whatever reason, Iowa just kind of turns away from him and doesn't even really give him a look, even though he played decent, especially in comparison to the other quarterbacks that had been playing for Iowa at that time. But this is the 2024-2025 roster. You had Brendan Sullivan. Again, a more mobile quarterback, probably a more run first quarterback. Let's see who else we had. We had James Razor, who was basically immediately switched to the wide receiver room upon Tim Lester getting to Iowa. And I was okay with that because Iowa definitely could use more depth, and especially considering the athletic ability that he did have and the size. I mean, the guy is 6'4", 212 pounds. Like, you know, that's really solid for a wide receiver, especially for a freshman. Like, it'd be one thing if he was a junior and Lester and Iowa decided to flip him. or switch positions, but you know, he was a true freshman. Um, I can also see the argument towards keeping him at quarterback, and you know, because you basically would potentially have the same upside at developing him into a really nice quarterback with some really nice athletic foundational tools. But you know, Tim Lester, I trust his analysis. Wasn't really excited about what he saw, and he made the change. If he was excited about anything he saw with James Razor, he probably would have kept him at the quarterback position. You also had Marco Lainez, which again, going back to Brian Ferentz, was a quarterback that Iowa was trying to, you know, go towards a more mobile quarterback. And I would say Marco Lainez, aka Marco Lainez, was probably one of the better gets for Brian Ferentz on the recruiting trail, but largely how he committed to Iowa was because of the connection that his high school his quarterback guru Tony Raciapi, who was also rumored to potentially be a guy to fill the quarterback coach job at Iowa, and there were some other like uh, even higher jobs at Iowa that I think he was linked to, even though it was quite delusional. And of course, Nate Stanley worked with Tony Raciapi, and you know, so he knew Nate Stanley, and then you know, Nate Stanley talked up Iowa. Nate Stanley did well at Iowa, and it just kind of made sense. You know, he had some decent offers, some other Big Ten schools, Michigan State had you know decent foundational tools, 6'2", 230 pounds. Like I would not be surprised if Linez does end up having a serviceable college career. You know, the guy, um, and I said this when he was joining the Iowa football program, the guy obviously puts a lot of time and energy into the quarterback position, and you know the work mentality that is required to be a quarterback at a high level. So Marco is now at Elon. He hit the transfer portal. Okay. I can't. I think he did it after the football season. Again, just Tim Lester really cleaning house. And you know, at the time, I was open to him staying at Iowa, and I think even at the time, it was kind of like, you know, you know, because we didn't. I don't think we had seen some of the additions that we would later see, which I will get to later in this video. It was kind of like, well, why don't we hold on to him? Like he's still a young prospect, you know. It wasn't just Brian Ferentz. There was other programs that liked his talent at the quarterback position. So it wasn't I didn't like disagree with it completely, but it was like you know, I can also make an argument why maybe Iowa should have tried to hold on to him. But the bottom line is, just to put this bluntly, Tim Lester was cleaning house. If you don't think that these programs, specifically Iowa, which is always labeled as a very authentic, truthful, and honest program, especially when it comes to communication with players, then you are just mistaken. Okay. If you don't think that they have conversations behind the scene about, you know, what they see for the player and where they are currently at in the depth chart and on the roster, you're just wrong. And so the writing was on the wall. You know, there's a reason why these players departed. Like they knew that they were no longer in the plans, and so you know he bounced. Kade McNamara, another one that left. You know, he did not have a successful year last year. Basically, got injured. Um, well, what did happen to Cade McNamara? Cade McNamara played, but he did get injured, and there was, you know, speculation about, you know, what was going on behind the scenes, and you know, mentally he wasn't right, and you know, and it basically forced Brennan Sullivan and Jackson Stratton into the starting lineup. Also, I totally forgot about the linebacker at the quarterback position that Iowa had in 2023. But it was kind of good though because like we got to see what Iowa had in Brendan Sullivan, which by the way, actually, I actually think that did Brendan Sullivan. I would have to look back at his recruiting profile. I can't remember if he joined Iowa under the Brian Ferentz regime or if it was under Tim Lester. I do believe it was under the Brian Ferentz regime because um, Brennan Sullivan was at Iowa for, I believe, for 2 years before he left Northwestern. I'm pretty confident about that. There's just not enough time to look through all that. But it was good to see, Jackson Stratton and it was good to see what Brendan Sullivan had. And initially, what we saw with Brendan Sullivan was decent. We saw his running ability, which that wasn't too bad. He actually looked, especially in the Tim Lester offense, he seemed to be able to pass the football decently well. So I actually think I have it here. So this is, it says January 31st, 2024, Iowa hires Tim Lester as OC. And this article, and by the way, he didn't play there in 2023. He was at Northwestern. Now he's at Tulane. Tulane. Um so that was the date. And then here uh now, it does say updated May 9th, but I think the original article was May 8th, 2024, um, that he commits to Iowa. Let's see if it announces. Let's see if it says in this article that Brian Ferentz was still there in this article. Actually, no, it says the program's repeated. So yes, this happened after it because it says the program's repeated offensive failures have led to a substantial amount of change on that side of the ball leading up to the 2024 season. Iowa hired ex-Western Midge coach Tim Lester as offensive coordinator, taking over for Brian Ferentz. So, anyways, we figured it out. So let's look at the stats from Iowa football 2023 and 2024. So these were the stats of the quarterbacks in 2023. Marco Lainez, aka Marco Lainez, Kade McNamara, and Deacon Hill. That's the name I was looking for, the linebacker that plays quarterback, who I think went to a D2 school or subdivision school, Division One, like championship series, like uh, Marco Lainez at Elon. But look at their completion percentage. I mean, just abysmal. Nobody had over 10 touchdowns. Iowa only had nine total passing touchdowns as a team to 11 INTs. I mean, just absolutely abysmal. And then we fast forward to 2014. Cade McNamara was the leader. He worked in the offseason to get healthy. It just was never there, and I do, for what it's worth, I actually do still hold Tim Lester accountable for playing Cade McNamara so much. I wish he had had the courage. And who knows? Maybe he actually did think that Cade McNamara was the best option at quarterback. We don't know behind the scenes. Maybe Kirk Ferentz said, no, you're going to start Cade McNamara first. We're going to see what we have in him. Because I've told you guys on many occasions that with NIL now, it is conceivable where these programs, increasingly have general managers. They're increasingly run like professional teams. That the way that they view it is, well, we need to get a return on this investment. We need to get a return on the investment that all these donors have contributed to. And so that's possible, But all things being equal, if it was Tim Lester's choice, I wish he had had the courage to go with Brendan Sullivan right off the bat because I would have liked to have seen more of Brendan Sullivan. I ultimately, if I had to bet, do I think that Brendan Sullivan was the guy to lead Iowa? No. If I was a betting man, no. But even at the time, and those of you guys who have been watching me for a long time, I said that my choice at the starting quarterback position would be Brendan Sullivan. Hell, I even said that I would consider going with a younger guy to develop. That way, and you could lean on the defense and just kind of go through the growing pains. But at least for the next couple of years, you would have a really highly developed and experienced quarterback. But I wanted to see what Iowa had in Brendan Sullivan. I was off the Kade McNamara train after his first year at Iowa. He was injury prone. His arm talent was, or lack thereof, was terrible, underwhelming to say the least. And I always said, like, what added advantageous element with Kade McNamara are we getting that we couldn't at the very least get with somebody else? Kade McNamara gives you average to below average rushing ability. He gets sacked. He gets hurt. He's average to below average at passing the football. Why not go with Brendan Sullivan? At the very least, you might get some added running element. And I was right. When Brendan Sullivan got thrust into the lineup, he did give Iowa that added element. Or at the very least, maybe Tim Lester could have given Brendan Sullivan more opportunities to see more snaps with Kade McNamara labeled as the number one quarterback. So I do still hold Tim Lester accountable for that. I think that was a mistake, and I think Iowa lost the Iowa State game because Kade McNamara was starting quarterback. Brendan Sullivan ended the year with 150 rushing yards, primarily off of one or two games. But in fairness to Tim Lester, Brendan Sullivan did sputter out. He got hurt as well, but he just, he got found out. And teams basically had a bend don't break mentality with him. We're not going to allow him to beat us with his legs. He started to force it, and he started to lean way too heavily on his legs, running when he didn't need to. And extending plays to run rather than to create extend plays to just make the best play. So that was the room last year. Now, fast forward just to, start to get through this video here. Tim Lester puts in work, and this I do have to give him credit for. Iowa, Kade McNamara, gone. Brendan Sullivan, well, Brendan Sullivan was actually there for a little bit, so I'm actually getting ahead of myself. But Iowa puts in work. The main was Kade McNamara gone. James Razor hit the transfer portal. Marco Lainez, aka Marco Lainez, hit the transfer portal. But Iowa puts in work. They missed on some guys in the transfer portal. Bo Pribula was a big name. The other name was the guy that played at USC, and he ended up committing to Louisville. Let me see if I can find his name real quick for you guys. Let's go ACC Louisville. I think his last name is Brown. But realistically, the best opportunity was Bo Pribula, which, I do think that was a good option. I'm glad Iowa didn't land him. I think Iowa ultimately landed the best quarterback that they could get, which obviously I'll get to momentarily. But it was a big name, and it showed that Tim Lester and Iowa was willing to do what it took to make their team the best, and that it was something that Beth Gates has Miller Moss, excuse me. How much Iowa really had a shot with him, who knows? But they tried, and they were linked to him. and they were reaching out. But Beth Gates, aka Beth Getz, um, absolutely, aka Beth Goats, has absolutely said that Iowa needs to be the best team that they can be. Football is the number one program, and that's something I appreciate about her. I am a guy that believes in taking calculated risks, and I believe that you should always have goals and aspirations that you are striving for. And for Iowa football, for a little bit there, things were getting stagnant. But due to some recent turnover and some changes at various positions at Iowa, Beth gets as well as okay Beth Goats as well as on the actual football team. Um, things have changed. I do think there's a new optimism when looking at this Iowa football team. But for a little while there, fans were concerned. Iowa missed on a few guys, but they stayed at it. And Mark Krennowski became available. And well, actually, let me backtrack. They went, they were patient, and they found a guy in the portal that was young, up and comer, that had played in the SEC, played for storied SEC program in the Auburn Tigers. And Iowa landed a nice depth piece, at the very least, a guy that could possibly compete for the starting position this upcoming year, but would need some development and some work in Hank Brown. I still love that get, and I can't wait to see what he's capable of doing. I think that is a highly underrated get to this day for Iowa football. He's more of a traditional pocket passer, high football IQ guy, but still, Iowa was patient. Again, they had missed on Bo Pribula, who chose to go to Missouri, and Mark Gronowski becomes available. And he's immediately linked to Iowa due to, South Dakota State, reminding a lot of people of Iowa, the connections from Iowa to, for whatever reason, Iowa has connections to North Dakota and the Dakotas and, places like that, Minnesota. And he's immediately linked. He has the Illinois connection, and he leaves South Dakota State to try his hand at the Division One level after basically doing it all at South Dakota State. Now, I can't remember if the South Dakota State coach had left, which is why he left, but still, nonetheless, he became available, and it was just a match made in heaven. But still, there was a lot of people who were after Mark Gronowski, and Iowa landed him. And fast forward even more, and I think even after the fall, this is April 22nd, 2025, we hear rumblings of former high three-star, Elite 11 quarterback, Wake Forest quarterback, high three-star, low four-star, Jeremy Hecklinski, who's, again, a young quarterback that Iowa can work with, becomes available. And Iowa lands him. And so here we are. I mean, that is Iowa's depth chart. That is how we have gotten to this place. And with the quarterback position specifically, I thought it was very important to give this broad, 2 to 3 year synopsis of where we were and how we got here. Now, to move this along, because I do really got to get going. Where this quarterback room is right now is largely unproven. We need to see the actual results. But I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. I love the work that Tim Lester and Iowa put in to revamp this quarterback room. On paper, I don't think that the quarterback room has been this talented in quite a long time. At least 5-10 years on paper. Has there been maybe one quarterback that Iowa had that was decent, but sure, but everybody else was mediocre at best. Gone were the days of Ken O'Keefe having, developed guys behind the starter, and, Iowa having serviceable quarterbacks, at the very least, top half Big Ten quarterback. And so, where we're at now, I mean, Iowa is very much seen as a dark horse because of the quarterback room and Tim Lester. You know, um, Mark Krennowski is rated as one, easily one of the top half Big Ten quarterbacks. Depending on which publication it is. Um, there was a recent article that I read. I think it was either ESPN or whatever it was that did like a tier ranking of quarterbacks. And Mark Gronowski, they ranked, I think, like top 40 overall nationally for quarterbacks, but they viewed him, and the tier was either young guys that had a lot of upside but hadn't proven it yet, or guys that have had success but for whatever reason, injuries, coaching situations, have had barriers towards them becoming what they can truly become. And Mark Gronowski fits that perfectly. Like, I totally agree. Like, he's had success at the FCS level, but and a lot, I think he's talented. He is talented, but it's another thing proving it at the Big Ten level. He's been injured. There's still some stuff that's unproven, but he does still have a decently high upside. And it's really a question of just whether he can stay healthy and prove it at the Big Ten level. So Iowa is seen again as a dark horse, depending on what Iowa gets out of the quarterback room, what they get out of Mark Gronowski. So just really quickly, what I think the depth chart is going to be, and then just to add out Iowa's quarterback room. Iowa did also land Jimmy Sullivan, who I think was actually originally committed under Brian Ferentz, but Tim Lester liked him, and I like his talent level too. He's got good size, he's athletic, he's got a good arm in Jimmy Sullivan. Um, so we'll see what happens with that. But they also landed a preferred walk-on high three-star that had multiple Division 1 Power Five or Division. Yeah, I think one other Power Four, but FBS offers. Let's see here in Ryan Fitzgerald. So when you take all of that into consideration, the room has really been put together nice. Is there a ton of like high upside, high end young talent on the roster? I, I would say that there's some other programs that probably have more of that. The Texas, the Ohio State, the Michigan, but it's better than what we've seen before. And we don't need the quarterback room at Iowa. It'll never be who Iowa is to be what some of these powerhouse programs are. We just need them to be serviceable, to be average and at times above average, and rarely, good to exceptional, but serviceable and can get the job done. That is what we need. So that's how this room has come together. And Jackson Stratton is still at Iowa. He's 6'4", 205 pounds. I think he's still definitely a name for people to keep an eye on. So the depth chart, I think, is going to be Mark Gronowski 1. I think it is going to be Hank Brown 2 to start the year, just because of how Iowa views him long term. Um, Jackson Stratton is going to have to win that position from him. But Jackson Stratton 3, Jeremy Hecklinski 4, and then Sullivan and Fitzgerald 5, 6. So I'm very excited about this quarterback room. I think that this is the most, as I said, this is the most talented it's been. I can't wait to see what Mark Gronowski is able to bring to this Iowa team, and I cannot emphasize this enough, that Mark Gronowski is likely going to be the difference between Iowa being a 7-8 win team or a 9-10 win team. If he is able to produce and be a great leader, stay healthy and, put together serviceable stats, be tough. I think that Iowa has the rounded out roster to compete with a majority of teams, even the high end teams. Because if you look at the other position groups, defense, special teams, Iowa is borderline elite at those position groups too. You know, um, I know what separates at some of the higher echelons uh, can seem like not a lot, but it really is at times. But still, this Iowa football team is in a really nice place. But again, Krennowski's got to stay healthy. But even if he's not, I feel good about this room being able to, hold the fort and still give us serviceable results. But again, lastly, this is going to be put up or shut up for Tim Lester to prove to Iowa fans and to Beth Getz that Iowa can be serviceable passing the football. Last year we saw it on the ground. Now it's time to see it through the air. And I do think that Iowa has the targets, serviceable targets, size, speed, athleticism. They have the run game, so it's all there. All right, guys, that's pretty much it. I'm not sure that there's much more to discuss with regards to the quarterback room. Those are all the major players. That's my projected depth chart. I'll do my overview of like projected stats and what stats at a later date when I do that video. But for now, just doing a positional overview. That is what Iowa fans can expect for this upcoming year. All right, guys, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts or feelings because your feelings just matter. Love you, Hawk fans. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye bye.